6 months ago, the infamous Veldon Reads posted an amazingly good YouTube video about his top 10 books of all time. For 6 months he disappeared, nowhere to be found. To the outside world, it appeared as if he had completely abandoned YouTube altogether. Or died. Until now. 'Cause I'm back! And I'm here to talk about my best fantasy and sci-fi books that I've read this year in 2023. Or I guess last year. And so this year was packed, and I'm saying packed all in caps, with amazing reads. And so I have a nice little list here of about 10 different books, so I'll be able to talk a bit about them and see whether or not you would also enjoy these books. And of course, I won't talk about any spoilers, so don't worry about that. So without further ado, the first book on this list, and this is in no particular order whatsoever, is The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is a dark, gritty fantasy series sprinkled in with a bit of humor in it. And so this is the third book in the original trilogy of the first Law series by Joe Abercrombie. And so this book is very different from the first book in the series, The Blade itself, because it offers a lot more action. It's very action-packed, it's very epic. And without talking too much about spoilers, I'll just say that there's a whole bunch of action the whole way through the book, and I really, really loved it. And the only gripe I would have with this book is that I wish it had been longer, because I love all the characters that are introduced in this book and all the characters that are introduced in the series as a whole. And I had just wished that I could spend a little bit more time with them, for sure. But this is one of my favorite reads of the year, and I cannot wait to reread it one day. Okay, so the next book in this list is New Spring by Robert Jordan. This is the prologue to the whole Wheel of Time series, and surprisingly, I loved this book. I had heard from multiple different people that it was just an okay book, but for me, I really enjoyed having this self-contained little story where we follow Moraine and Swan while they're in the White Tower, and they are accepted instead of a full Aes Sedai. And it was just a very nice short story about these characters when they were a lot younger. So we were able to see as well how these characters reacted to certain challenges compared to how they react to them when they're a lot older, as we know them a lot more in the main Wheel of Time series. And so I really liked this book. Thank you. This is arguably the best book in this list. This is a Roman-inspired fantasy series with a framing narrative, meaning that the character mentions at the very beginning of the series that he's killed billions and billions of people in a solar system, and then he spends the next 7 books explaining how and why it happened. And so this is the first book in the series, and so we're introduced to all these characters, to all these different alien species and different planets. Hadrian is an incredible protagonist. He is this melodramatic noble who loves to think about the past and think about different theories and such. And this series deserves so much more love. It has gotten a bit more attention recently in the past year, but it deserves a lot more attention. So if you have not read this book, you definitely should. The Black-Tongued Thief is another book you should definitely try if you love fantasy books that has lots of humor in it. So in this series, we follow Kinch Nashamak, who is a black-tongued thief who is tricked into going into a quest on the other side of the world. So he has to travel in this goblin-infested world, in a world where there is no more horses because they've all been killed off or gotten sick by this goblin war. So I've actually listened to this book on audio, and it's actually Christopher Buehlman, the author of this book, who also narrates the book. And he has this amazing accent that just makes the book 10 times, 100 times better. So if you're unsure about whether or not you should pick this book, I definitely recommend you try to at least listen to the sample on Audible or whatever, just so that you can listen to what the actual book would sound like with his narration, because it's just excellent. For this next book, we are back with Joe Abercrombie. So this is the next installment after The Last Argument of Kings. This is a standalone novel set in the same world, but it follows different characters or different side characters that are introduced in the First Law trilogy. So all the action scenes in this book are very cinematic, in my opinion, and we follow these characters who go on a quest for revenge, and it's brutal, it's hilarious, it's just amazing. And as I've mentioned previously, Abercrombie writes some amazing dialogue, and it's with the humor in this book mixed with the brutalness of it really goes well in Best Served Cold. And so the characters in this book are just also spot on. And so once again, I can't wait to reread this book once I've finished the entire First Law series. The next book in this list is The Sunlit Man by Brandon Sanderson. This is Secret Project number 4 in the year of the Sanderson boxes, and it was by far the most Cosmere-aware book in his whole, on the 4 books that he released in 2024. And so I would recommend reading this book only if you've read pretty much everything else that he's posted in the Cosmere before reading this book. This is a Sanderson book, meaning that there's a lot of awesome world building elements to it. I can also show the back of the book, which is just as gorgeous. And this was also Sanderson's first real sci-fi book inside the Cosmere. So it's really, really cool because we get to see how the Cosmere might evolve through time in Mistborn Era 3 and 4, as well as the second arc of the Stormlight Archives. This follows a character which we've seen before in the Cosmere, who ends up on this planet where the sunlight is deadly. So he tries to escape this planet as well as escape the sunlight throughout the book, and it's just an excellent read, and I cannot wait to read it again once I've read the Stormlight Archives number 5. This next book is The Lesser Devil, which I don't have any physical copy of, is the sequel novella of Empire of Silence. And so this story follows the brother, Crispin, of Hadrian, which is the protagonist of the main series. And in this series is just a very fun short read where we get to see what happens to this specific character during the events of Empire of Silence. And so while this short story is a sci-fi book, the characters in this book are thrown into this more medieval, primitive environment. So it's very cool to see this clash between these ideologies of more futuristic times, and as well as different like bigger guns and stuff mixed with this more primitive environment, or more medieval times environment. Next up, we've got The House in the Cerulean Sea. So this is one of those very cozy fantasy series. It follows the story of Linus, who moves to this isolated island to take care of these magical kids who are in an orphanage. And so it's a heartwarming and enchanting story, and it's a very, very big change from Best Served Cold, which I had read just before reading this book. So it's amazing to have this transition between brutal, hilarious, dark fantasy to this cozy fantasy and heartwarming story. And of course, if I talk about cozy fantasies, I've got to mention Legends and Lattes by Travis Baltry. This is the face of cozy fantasy. If you haven't heard of this book before, you've been living under a rock. It's very, very popular so far. This is the Broken Binding edition as well, so it's really, really gorgeous. So it follows this orc who starts their own coffee shop. Whenever I think of this book, I can almost smell and taste the pastries and the coffee coming out of the pages. The descriptions of the food sounds so good in this book, and it makes me want to try every one of those recipes. So if I could compare a book to a blanket, Legends and Lattes would be the biggest, coziest, warmest blanket you would ever have. And last but not least, we've got The Death of Dulgath, which is part of the Rhaeria Chronicles series. So this follows Royce and Hadrian, who are this most awesome duo in all of fantasy. Hadrian is this very big guy, very positive, always wants to do the good thing, whereas Royce is this thief who hates everything. He's very pessimistic about life. And so their bromance during this book is just amazing as always. Death of Dulgath is kind of a standalone story set in this world of Elan, and we follow these two characters who are hired to try to find different ways to kill a specific noble. And so it's a very light read with familiar faces. It's very funny and cozy as well. So it's always nice to be back in the world of Elan with Royce and Hadrian. And as an honorable mention, we've got the one and only Harbinger of Justice by Andrew Watson, aka The Fool's Tale. So this is a fellow booktuber as well as a fellow bookstagrammer of mine, but still, I absolutely loved his debut novel. This is an ancient Egypt inspired fantasy book, and it has some really cool magic systems. It has some ancient gods and some mysterious cities. It has some old libraries, magical libraries, and it really has some cool magic systems as well, such as some shadow-based magic systems and some kind of blood dagger magic systems. So if you love ancient Egypt or anything like that, I definitely recommend reading Harbinger of Justice by Andrew Watson. So please let me know if you've read any of these books before, and if so, let me know if you've loved them or not. And I would love to chat in the comments just to see what you thought about these books. And so thank you so much once again. And hopefully it won't be another 6 months before I post my next video. But who knows? I love chaos.